Hey everybody, what's up? Welcome to Adobe Live. Today we're hanging out. We're doing some video with our friend Justin Odisho. Hi, Justin. How are you?
Hey Andrew, nice to see everyone today.
Yes. So, chat, let us know where you're watching from. And for those people that are watching the live show, we're guessing that you just came over from our Adobe Express bootcamp, learning how you can use Adobe Express with Premiere Pro. So hopefully you enjoyed that, and hopefully you're going to stick around for some more Premiere Pro content. Justin, what are we working on today?
Sure. So today we're going to be doing sort of a master class of effects in Premiere. So from the very basics of the effects panel, what's all in there, what it all is, and the effect controls panel, and then even jumping into how to use them and keyframes and all that. And since this is a 2-day stream, once we get through the majority of that today, then tomorrow we can also get into combining effects in more advanced ways and creating our own custom presets and fun things like that.
Yes, and I love the workflow today. So right before this, like I said, there was a workflow that was using Adobe Express with video, very basic. We used some auto reframe stuff, and now we're getting a little more advanced in some effects. And then tomorrow we're gonna get really advanced into some kind of more complex effects. So I love that journey. If you all want all the content from everything happening here at Adobe Live, if you forget about a video or you want to see the second half, go ahead and click on that subscribe button. Justin, can you do your fingers just like this real quick?
Sure.
Just right there. So if you
Oh,
hover, yeah, where his fingers are, the title will come up and you can go subscribe to Adobe Live on YouTube. It's my favorite because for us, there's nothing there, but for you guys, that's what we do it for. Go give a subscribe and you can follow along for all the great content here on Adobe Live. So Justin, I'm going to hand the mic over to you, let you do your intro, kind of tell us a little bit about you, show your website, and even some things that people can do to get involved with the stream today.
sure. Thanks, Andrew. So yeah, for anyone not familiar with me, my name's Justin Odisho. I have a YouTube channel just going by my name, Justin Odisho. And primarily I focus on teaching editing video and photo in the Adobe apps, such as Premiere Pro, After Effects, some Photoshop, even some Lightroom and other stuff. But today we're going to be focusing in on the Premiere Pro and specifically the effects. So if you're interested in anything, like this is just going to be 2 hours. But on my channel, I have hundreds and hundreds of videos, and I actually have a whole playlist on every effect in Premiere Pro explained. But things are always changing in Premiere. There's new ones, things are changing. And also for anyone interested, if you don't have any footage to work along with, or if you just want some stuff to practice with, on my website, justinodisho.com, I have a shop section. And in that section, I actually have a free stock footage pack. So
Free.
that's right. Well, you could set the price to whatever you want. So you could
Love
set
that.
it to $0. And if you want to just download some footage to play around with, I'll be using some of that footage today. So just some practice footage if you want to test out the effects or work along or maybe work after the stream. So yeah,
Sweet. And you do
that's
have other
me.
things in the store as well. You have other clips that people can use, other effects, and then you also have a podcast. You've done talks. You've done. You're
Yeah.
kind of all over the place. I love
Yeah,
this.
I've been making content and editing for like over 10 years. So yeah, if you want to skip all the learning and just get all the presets done for you, I do sell those on my website. But let's see if we can learn something today and see what's in store.
Yes, I love that. All right. So today we're working in Premiere Pro, and we are going to be mostly using the effects panel, from what I hear. Right?
Yep. So I'm just gonna act like we just opened Premiere. We just opened a project. Let's assume that we can do that part without me teaching it. But hey, that's for my YouTube channel. I start from the very scratch. But just so everyone is familiar with what's going on, the first thing I'm actually gonna do is go to Window. So sometimes people they don't see certain panels or like where mine is different from where there is. So for any confusion, just always make sure you can go to Window. You can make sure that the effects panel is checked on so it's visible. And what I like to do is just workspaces, reset to saved layout or reset to default. And that way you never lose your panels and you can follow along.
Yep. And if you have a workflow that you enjoy or windows that work well for you, you can always save that so that you don't have to use a basic one. You can have your own, a custom workspace.
Right. If like for me, for example, like sometimes if you want to just slightly adjust some windows based on, the size of your computer or something, then you can save it as a custom workspace with the windows that you want open. And Premiere also comes with different preset workflows. Like let's say you're just working on color, different things like that, which are useful.
Sweet. And for reference for everyone, I'm not a video guy, so I'm very excited to learn these. I don't know much about effects. I know a little bit about cutting here and there in Premiere, so I'm going to be the audience, and I'm very excited to see what we have today. If you have questions, anyone in chat, go ahead, put them in our live chat. This is a live stream. We're here. I'm reading. If you have questions for Justin, if you are watching the replay on YouTube, drop them down in the comments. We'd love to reply and kind of get you some answers. Or if you just want to say hi, say hi. We love to hear from you. All right, Justin. So we're working on effects today. What's this footage? What are we going to start with? What's our step number one?
Sure. So let me just sort of get rid of everything, first of all. So
step number one, delete everything. Got it.
Right. Step number one. You'd be surprised, actually. Some of the most difficult things, and I remember when I was first trying to learn like After Effects, for example, some of the most difficult things is like, oh, like you closed your timeline or you closed the panel and like it looks like everything's gone. So there's actually, I think this is important. There's a few ways to start a sequence or a timeline. So you can just, for one, just drop media in there. It'll just make a new sequence or timeline like based on the size of your clip. So if you go to the info tab and highlight this clip, you see this just your standard like 1920 by 1080 HD sequence. So that'll be easy enough, and I'll just build off of this. But you can also always go to File, New Sequence. Just make sure that the project panel is highlighted. So these are the little things that I think that confuse people out, but hopefully we like learn a lot of these panels, because I think once you understand the panels, I always equate it to like riding a bike. It's once you like get past the confusion of what's this button and that, then you can actually get into working, and it's actually a lot more accessible and like learnable and doable than people think. Most of the time they just don't know.
Like cooking, you got to understand the ingredients before you start mixing them together.
Right. And then there is so many buttons if you're brand new that it's just hard to get around the editing kitchen, so to speak. So the next panel, so what we're going to be focusing on is the effects panel. And this actually kind of goes hand in hand with the effect controls panel, which is on the left side. So I'm going to break down how those work together. So make sure you have your effects panel and your effect controls, and that's on the left hand side. So a few things that you might not even know, even if you're like an advanced editor, is like Premiere and a lot of the Adobe apps, they actually tell you a lot of information, but sometimes we just don't pay attention to it. So for example, you'll notice that every clip has this little FX badge on it. And right now it's gray, and that means that there's no effects on this clip. And you'll notice that if I ever tweak anything, so in the effect controls panel, you can always drop down all these things. These are the basic motion control or video effects that come on every clip. These are not like special effects. You always have the option to adjust the position, the scale, and rotation, and all of these things. And also another very useful tip is this reset parameter button. Also, you always have the option to reset everything back to normal. And you also always have the option to adjust the opacity. So you'll notice as soon as I do adjust that, if we take our eyes back over to that effects badge, Premiere is letting us know that there's an effect on this clip.
Yellow.
Yeah. So actually, they're actually color coded, so there's even more info. So like just opacity, it's like yellow. You'll notice even if I add something more, and here's a key thing that you notice I'm going to be doing during the stream is since there are so many effects, you could just search. Like I'm searching blur because I'm looking for the Gaussian blur. And it opens up everything with that. So it's really easy to search by keyword or search by the name of the effect there. That's a really useful tip.
And that's cool. I didn't know that it was color coded. So if you're doing kind of basic stuff like opacity, movement, it's yellow, and then effects are green, and it actually color codes based on what you're stacking on that clip, right?
Right. So it's really useful like when you have a lot of effects and you sort of forgot, like sometimes there'll be something happening and you're not sure why. You can always look and see like, did I adjust anything about this? And you see green is when I add more effects on top of. There's like more literal definitions, I think, on the Adobe help pages, but they are color coded for you at least. And also then when you right click on a clip and go to remove attributes, you also can tie that with this. So here, like, let's say I just want this clip to go back to default. I don't like the effects I did on it, or I just want to reset it all. I can just uncheck everything that I did to it and it'll tell me, or I could just uncheck like a few effects. And now, oh, I gotta actually do it, not uncheck everything, and press OK. And now you see like the badge turns off, everything goes back to normal.
Back to gray.
Right. So these are just some of your options available to you when working with effects. Just some of the very basics that you need to know, but we're going to get even more. I'm gonna show you even more handy tools. So
sweet. So someone in our chat is saying, I'm comfortable using other video editors and find Premiere a little bit complicated. What would you suggest to remove this way of thinking and feel better with Premiere Pro? I have a great answer for you. Behance.net/challenge/Premiere. We do Premiere Pro daily challenges about 1-2 weeks a month, and they're very basic. This will be a little bit more of an advanced stream of what we're doing today, but they're short, bite-sized, very basic streams for you to learn the basics and hopefully get more comfortable. So check it out. One of the mods will put the link in chat, and you can sign up for our next one that starts in 2-3 weeks. We'll start another one. So with our friend James Bonanno, who's supposed to be here today, but could not make it. So if you want to learn more, check those out. All right, let's hop in. Let's do some effects. Let's learn about making our clips add a little spice.
Right. Yeah. So to that questioner, yeah, check out. There's lots of resources online like that. And really, I'd say like once you just learn where everything is, then you'll start to pick up the pieces.
Yep.
So hopefully we can help out with that. So, right. So the next thing I was going to say is like another really handy tip whenever you're working with effects is you'll notice I'm adjusting everything right now by sliders. So like when I hover over this scale, the cursor turns into a slider and then I can slide left and right. But another really handy tip is if you ever highlight one of these and just make sure your selection tool from your toolbar is active, you'll also see the more traditional like interface of just a bounding box and like points that you can click. And this is really useful for a lot of different effects. Not even just in the motion, but a lot of effects, they make more sense when you can visually move things around rather than sliders. So I think this is another tip that will help someone out that's confused by all these manual way of doing things. And also you'll notice Premiere, I think this is a relatively more recent update within the past few years. There's even like nice guides and rulers and snaps to center, like as you're seeing everything snapping to center.
Yep. And I think a lot of the recent updates have been for efficiency, to help the workflow, to really just make things easier to edit video here. And yes, that is one of the ones that is a newer thing that makes things so much easier to find the exact center and exactly where you need it to be.
Right. Especially even, let's not forget, if you're working on like text. Oh, another thing for anyone working with effects is sometimes it'll show you your reference window and sometimes your program. Working in your program window usually solves issues of like, why can't I see my cursor or whatever? So yeah, another thing about effects is not only can they work on video clips, but also any pictures or text or shape objects, all will have the same options in the effect controls panel. So this is really one of the most foundational tools that you're going to be working with as an editor in Premiere. And everything that I've just told you so far also applies to other things like text and objects. And, you know, now I can snap things to the grid as well. But we'll maybe get into text after. So why don't we start now? Oh, also the opacity tab, you know, if you're familiar with Photoshop, a lot of these things cross over between many Adobe products. So that's another thing to any commenters that are like a little bit having trouble. The nice thing is once you learn these things, not only will you have more ease in Premiere, but also within the whole Creative Cloud suite, probably. Yep. So opacity, just like how transparent a clip is or not, it's showing as black as transparent, but that's just something you can adjust in this menu. You can choose to show transparency or not. But anyways, let's start out now and open our effects panel, and I'll take you on a little tour of what's in here. and we can get started with the fun stuff. So here you have presets, and that's something that we'll get into after. We'll save that for dessert or later.
Dessert, yes.
And so presets, right? You do have the ability to create presets. Premiere comes with some presets, and like I was saying, I've made some presets and stuff. So for example, like here's a preset I made that adds like a blurry like vignette around the edges, like something like that. And we'll go into how I created all those. Or here's a preset that adds like a VHS camcorder look, and has this little like scan line going through it, if you notice. So
that's cool.
Yeah, and another thing too is this little red or yellow or green bar. The more heavy effects and the more effects that are on there, you might need to buffer or render your clip. So just a simple I to create an endpoint, O to create an out point, and return will render those effects. But anyways, there's so much to learn. So those are presets. We're gonna save that till we learn some of the more basics. And you'll notice we have a few folders: audio effects, transitions, video effects. So we'll be mostly focusing with the video effects, because these apply directly on top of a clip, as opposed to video transitions, which apply in between the cuts. But I'll go over a little bit of each, and I'll also show you how you can make your own custom transitions using these effects and keyframes.
Cool. And it looks like those are organized kind of by topic in there, but you also showed us that you can search. So if you're looking for a keyword, you can kind of just try to figure out what topic would it be under, or you can just type it in that search bar up there and it will bring you directly to that effect if it is named that. But I love that they are organized with like transform, adjust, channels, distort, so you can kind of find and search what you're looking for.
Right, and you get familiar with these different families of effects. I think these are just alphabetical, but then within each folder you can drop it down and see all of the different effects in there. So yeah, but I use the search feature a ton, because it's just less clicks than opening everything.
Yep. All right, what's our first effect going to be that we're jumping into?
Sure. So I thought, why don't we start with some of my most favorite effects and some of the coolest effects in Premiere. And so a lot of those we'll find in the distort folder. So I'll open the distort folder, and one of the coolest effects, in my opinion, is the wave warp effect. So the process of adding an effect to a clip is you just highlight it, you click it, and you drag it onto the clip. So pretty simple. And right, so this is the wave warp effect. And actually, I'm going to place it on a clip where there's less motion, so you can actually really see the power of this effect. So if I click and drag this effect onto this image, why this is one of my favorites and one of the coolest things about this is when I press play, this is, I think, one of the only effects in Premiere that automatically has some sort of animation or motion without adding any keyframes or doing anything. So it's just automatically moving, which is cool and makes it very powerful. So you'll notice whenever you add an effect, now we go into our effect controls panel like we talked about. And on top of the standard motion and opacity tools that we have, we also now see the effect that we've added. So, and within the effect, they each have all their different little parameters. So some of them only have one, just maybe like a strength. Some of them have a lot, like the wave warp, which is why I think this is such a cool effect, because it's like a whole suite of effects within itself. So the standard thing is, the wave height and the wave width, right? Oh. So obviously sometimes things can look a little crazy by default. The power is when you really adjust things. So let's say I wanted to sort of give like almost like a dream sequence, like when you're fading off into a dream. Yep. Yeah, right.
Totally know what you're talking about.
Right. So you'll notice since it's stretching the original square image, a cool tool in here is the pinning effect. So we can sort of pin all of those edges back where they need to be, just sort of stretch them back where they need to be, because we probably don't want those black edges there. And then the other cool thing is the wave speed. So this is a speed of 1. So it's it's just moving, it's just undulating. But I can lower it down to like 0.5 or 0.3 for a slower effect. And I can also increase the wave width for a more spaced out effect. And the really cool part about this is that I don't have to touch any keyframes. It's just automatically making this cool effect.
It's just happening, which is probably the benefit of using this effects panel and kind of customizing, as opposed to trying to learn how to do this from scratch. I feel like that'd be way complicated. And this is like, cool, let's drag this on and then customize it to my own liking.
Right. And one thing I'll say, Andrew, is as someone who as someone who's been on like the receiving end of a lot of questions of like, how do you do this effect? How do you do that effect? A little like motivational or thing that hopefully will inspire some confidence in any editors. You'd be surprised that like 90% of any effect that you probably see, or like wonder like, how the heck did they do that? Like 9 out of 10 times, it's just like you don't know what tool they used, but the tool is there, and it's just sort of like it's not as complex as it seemed. Like
exactly, yeah. How did you do that? 3 sliders. Like it's just a couple sliders, a couple inputs, and yeah.
Right. If you totally didn't know anything about video editing, you might think like, how did you like distort the footage like that and make it like ripple? But it's all the people that work on the like the coding and whoever builds these effects are the real heroes here.
Yep.
The math. So the other cool thing behind this effect is not only can you choose all of these settings that automatically just start working, you can actually adjust the type of wave. So these are all based on some sort of math. I'm pretty sure like a sine wave, but I am not the expert for that one. But the cool part is you can play around with some of these different sort of mathematical waves. So this is a square wave type. And now we're getting a totally different effect that we have this concrete line that's happening. And we also can change the direction of this. So if you noticed for that clip where I did like a VHS sort of effect, and I wanted like that old TV scan line to be going through it, how I created it is actually in this way, creating this sort of square wave warp. And you can adjust the height and the width, but what this is aiming to replicate is like, the refresh rates on, old TVs or monitors in a sort of like a glitchy style.
That's cool. And I think that like, if you're watching this and trying to track through the effects and stuff, like start keeping a catalog of these. Cause when I looked at that VHS, I was trying to pick apart like what elements are stacking. And so this is kind of like a base of one of those elements, right? That you have the base, and then we probably add like some chromatic abrasion on top, some like noise of like, it's all just stacked pieces and not just one thing you're putting on there. So as you're watching, keep the library building. This is our first one, is this kind of scanning wave warp.
Right. Yeah. And you see, even just within wave warp, like I could show you 5 different ways to use it.
Yep.
And that's the other thing, when people ask me like, can you break down how this effect was done? The reason I am able to sort of do it half the time is because I know a lot of what the tools and ingredients are. So I can sort of be like, oh, that looks like they added a blur, and then it looks like they added a wave warp set to square and whatever. So, I'm not going to go through every single one, but another cool one that I'll show you is the like noise or smooth noise. And this is really cool for like more intense glitching effects. So it's really using like a noise.
Whoa.
And yeah, so it's really splitting things apart. And you can adjust how it is. And I've done this with text. I've done this for transitions. Like I've done this to get a cool like text animation going on. And the other thing, like keep creative. Like this is at a wave speed at all, but the other thing is you can make the wave speed 0. So maybe I just want like a static distortion happening on this, like a leaning tower or something. Right. So you can still see people walking around and the clouds moving, but like the distortion is static. And then now I think maybe is a good time where we introduce the other really powerful thing within effects is keyframes. So if you'll notice in the effects control panel, next to every effect, there's this little stopwatch icon. That's what that is. And if you ever click and toggle it on, it says toggle animation. So you see it turns blue and the little stopwatch ticker goes on. And this little blue diamond here is called a keyframe. So what this is doing is it's adding a little sort of checkpoint at the current parameters. So if I started at 0, it just looks like nothing because it started at 0. Then if I move over some in the clip, I can now add another checkpoint or another keyframe. As soon as you adjust the effect, it'll automatically add it, or you can click this button. So I can add a keyframe at like a more strengthened wave height. And then let's say I want to move forward again, I can take it back down to 0. So this is a common theme that you'll see is like adding a group of keyframes that go from a starting point to something to another thing. And if I allow that to progress throughout you can move these keyframes around. And now when you play back the clip, and you'll notice you have another timeline that you can just work with in the effect controls panel, which is handy. So you don't have to always look down here. As I play this clip, you'll notice that over time, we'll slowly get this cool, like morphing, like what's that game, Jenga? Or what is that game with the blocks?
Right. Yeah, that's wild. And I think especially being on the sky background, it looks like it's not affecting the sky as much. And so it looks like that tower is just like tearing apart. That's so cool.
Right. And actually, you made a good point there, which I'll get into another powerful tool. But yeah, I'm just like getting creative here and freestyling. Like these are effects that I didn't necessarily plan out specifically before, but things that I know. And the other important thing with video is like the same effect can have a radically different look depending on the clip you use. So for this tower, we can use it to make like a cool block thing distortion. And for a clip of people, we can use the same wave warp to make more of maybe like a dream sequence sort of idea happening, or like maybe like a liquidy sort of, like a liquid sort of feeling. Obviously,
so let's say that we have it on one clip and we want to transfer to another clip. Is there an easy way to kind of just like copy and paste between the two?
That's a really good point, actually. And yeah, you can quite literally just copy and paste. So let's say I want the same exact glitch that I just created, and we'll get into creating presets later, but let's just say, just for now, I don't want to make a preset, but I just want to copy this. I'll just right click copy, or you can even Command C or whatever operating system you're working on. Highlight the other clip in the effect controls panel and just Command V. We get the same exact wave warp, the same exact keyframes too. Except for sometimes you want to be careful because this clip is shorter, so not all the keyframes got to play out, but you get the same exact wave warp happening, and you can actually paste them over many clips. So if you do create a cool effect and you have different shots, this one's kind of cool. It's sort of splitting the handrail.
That's cool because the lines are not being affected because they're all perfectly horizontal. So when it shifts, they just stay the same. That's really cool.
Right. And so what I was going to say with the tower thing is probably like another really important thing, and this might be getting a little advanced, but we'll use it when we're really customizing, is every effect, also you'll notice, has these three icons: the ellipse mask, the polygon mask, and the free draw mask. I'm not gonna. I always don't know how to pronounce Bezier. Is it Bezier? I don't know.
I pronounce it Bezier. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. I always avoid that one. But so for example, if we create an ellipse mask, now what we can tell Premiere is, let's apply this effect, but only on this portion that I specify. So now we can really literally isolate just the tower and add a little bit of feathering onto that mask. Yeah, if you zoom in hard enough, you'll see some of the clouds, but it's a pretty workable solution without getting too custom. And actually, I've never even really made an effect like this, but that's pretty cool. I think now we've literally isolated just the tower by masking the effect, and everything else is not being affected. Like none of the other buildings are. And that's a pretty cool, unique effect. I've never made a video about that or anything.
That's a really cool effect that looks like it would be like this crazy 3D render with like advanced, and it's like, nope, it is literally one effect with a mask on it.
Right. And you have so much flexibility like on adjusting the other things. And the other thing is this is just I just did a slow like ramping keyframe from 0 to moderate to 0. The other thing is like, let's say I wanted to make like crazy glitchy effects happening. I can squeeze everything real close together, and then maybe I can highlight all those keyframes, copy them. I'm just using the copy shortcut Command C on Mac, and then paste them elsewhere and paste them a few times. And now it'll be like a normal clip, but if like every so often, if you blink, you'll see like this shift happening, you know?
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's a really cool effect.
Yeah. And I'm sure if you've, it actually sort of reminds me, like if you go to like a modern art museum and sometimes they have those like video installations.
Yep.
It'll oftentimes be something like some image. And then like, if you watch it long enough, like something will happen to it.
Yeah, you know? This reminds me of like, this would be a great effect for like a music video, right? Yeah, something that's like pulsing with the beat and it's like doing like the little like shifts and stuff. It's a really cool effect.
Yeah, that's a good idea. So the other thing that I kind of want to mention now that you said, like, can we apply the same effect onto many different clips? I think this is one that many people might not know, but it is useful to know. It's called source effects. So while we're dealing more so with like the creative sort of effects there with the wave warp, but let's say I have a relatively long clip, and let's say there's different instances of this clip scattered throughout my project. So like, let's say, you know, I cut to it here, you know, in a real edit, you're cutting back and forth between the same scene. Like,
yeah, you've got a 10-minute B-roll shot and you're using 6 different versions of it kind of thing.
Right. So let's say we have different instances of a clip. Every time you cut it, let's say for this clip, I just wanted to do something really functional. So what I'll do is go to the transform menu. There's an effect called horizontal flip or vertical flip. Let's say somehow like you shot some footage on your phone, it was backwards, or like you shot it in the mirror and you just need to flip it. I know this footage isn't necessarily backwards, but let's say you did just need to flip it for a functional reason, like sort of like a color, like you could equate it to color correction, but video correction. And you'll notice if you just apply it on one cut, it only applies that effect on the cut. So that's one thing to keep in mind about applying effects, is it's just applying on clips, which can be all from the same longer clip, but right, you get the point. But like you're saying with pasting the effect, a better way to do this than pasting it over every single instance of the clip is actually, if you just go to source, right here, you see how it says source in the effect controls panel. You highlight the source clip, you can actually apply effects onto the source clip. So I'll click and just drag it on here. Right. And now another like thing to notice is you see the effects badge on all of them has a red underline. It's sort of small, hard to see, but you do see that, right? Yeah. So that means that now every instance of this clip, no matter how I cut it up, no matter what other effects and colors I put on it, at least they're all flipped horizontally because I wanted it that way, you know? And that's a really functional tip that I think a lot of people don't know, even if they are, you know, even if they know a lot of stuff in the effects panel.
That's great, especially for that use case of like, oh, this shot needs to get flipped everywhere that I'm using it, or it needs to get zoomed in 20% because my finger was in the side of my camera or whatever. It's like, cool, everywhere that is, we can just apply it to the source instead of the clip, and then it will fix it across the board. That's really cool. Right.
And I think what you should start to be seeing is like, from the eyes of a brand new user to Premiere, a lot of these buttons and stuff, it might be invisible, but now that I'm pointing out like every single button, I bet you didn't even see that there before, you know?
Oh, no. I thought that it was just a reference to where we were. I didn't think it was editable.
Right. Sometimes it's just like a things like look invisible to you if you don't know that they exist. What's that? There's like a phenomenon where like
Oh, like if the tree, Schrodinger?
no, that's more advanced than I was thinking. No,
That's
like when you when you first hear a word and then you start to hear it everywhere.
oh yes, I know what
Right.
you're talking about.
It's like when you first learn that like a tool or button exists, then like you realize it was in front of your eyes the whole time.
Yes.
But yeah, so I think that's another useful thing to point out is editing source effects and versus how you apply effects onto a single clip originally. So let's jump into, so that's a lot of use cases for wave warp, and I'll squeeze in one more just because it's fun and it's a really good one.
Let's do it. We love effects. I'm having
Yeah.
a great. I'm learning so much, and I'm having a great time. So
Okay, great.
carry on.
Let's like another cool thing I was saying is you can apply, don't forget that you can apply effects onto text, objects, and logos as well. So actually one really cool one that's that I do with wave warp a lot is apply it onto text, and this is how you get like that ripple text effect. And of course I like to maybe slow it down and adjust the width based on the text, and this is how you can get that cool ripple text effect in Premiere, which you'd think you need to go to After Effects and do some crazy intense stuff, but it's all right there for you.
Click and drag.
Yep. And then like the noise for the text can create like really cool like glitchy text effects.
That's cool. And that's something that when we just learned about using the keyframes, that's something that you could have it be regular text and then explode using a keyframe by having that noise on the text, right?
Right. And this is where, and don't forget about masks. Like this is where you could really, this is how you get to start building really advanced effects based on these basic building blocks. And we'll get into creating our own transitions with keyframes and whatnot. But just another cool idea for you. Now, why don't we jump into another fun effects just so you get a cool sampling, just anyone that's watching. Like I imagine we're like on a tour bus and we're sightseeing through the different effects in Premiere. So let's find a clip. Okay, so these people walking here. One of my other favorite folders, we'll probably jump back to the distort folder later. There is other cool stuff in here for sure.
Cool.
But why don't we now take a look at another really cool effect, which is the time folder. Okay, the time folder is pretty slim. There's only 2 things in there, but they're both a couple of my favorite effects in Premiere. So why don't we just show both of them?
I do think that of things I've made, I have used the Echo time feature once. And I think that like that was the extent of my effects. So I'm excited to see what we do with it here.
Right. So, I mean, we're speaking about video, so time is like what we're manipulating here. So one really cool one is called Posterize Time. And if you're familiar with Photoshop, there's a posterize effect in Photoshop, which like posterizes the colors.
Yep.
But this sort of posterizes the frame rate. So if I click and drag this onto the clip, normally, you know, with cameras, they shoot like 24 frames per second, and that's just like smooth video. But what you can do with the posterized time effect, this is a lot more simple, right, than the wave warp. But you still have all the same things such as the masking and the keyframe and the stopwatch, but it's just one parameter, which is frame rate. So if by default it's just like the normal frame rate, but what's cool about posterized time is we could just make this clip be like 4 frames per second. So now what we achieve with we took smooth video and we've now turned it into like a stop motion sort of effect. And you can try different ones, but sometimes you might think that this takes you must take a series of photos to achieve this sort of effect. But we've done it here simply by using posterized time.
That's so great. And I can see, like, I'm thinking back to commercials for like food that I've seen, or like I know that I've seen this used in a commercial before that wanted that like stop motion look that very obviously was just shot. And so it's connecting the dots of like, oh, they literally just used the posterized time and like that was it to get this really cool new effect.
Right. It could look really cool, like just with one individual, like one thing moving across the frame, but you can see it looks like a snapshot of photos, and you can change the frame rate, but something around 3 or 4 usually is, I think, pretty neat looking. And another thing to keep, so like I was saying earlier, with like the effects are just half the equation and your original video is the other equation. So one distinction I always like to keep in mind is it like a still frame tripod shot, such as the tower shot that we were working with, that allows for different sort of possibilities because we can manipulate the contents without the frame moving around? Or is it a shot where the camera is also moving around? That changes things a little bit. So I think that's like just a little point that can help you as an effect creator. So the other thing in here is that we haven't touched on, which is kind of basic. We probably can legibly read everything now in the effect controls panel, but this little FX badge is really useful as well. You could toggle effects on or off. So if I show you a little bit more of a better example, like if I just search black and white, that's in the image control section, I could just apply a black and white effect on here. And I can always toggle the effect on or off just so I can see what's going on, or like see what happened to my clip, or see what it looks like if I turned one effect on or off. So another thing to keep in mind. But aside from that, I think now we can read mostly everything that's going on in here, and that should hopefully make people feel more equipped and comfortable with what's going on. But building back up on the Posterize Time, another cool thing that we can do with the time effects, like you were mentioning, is the echo effect. So
yes,
right. So the echo effect is really cool in that. Let me go back to that. Let me go back to the clip that's a little bit more stationary. So the echo effect is cool because if I apply it onto this clip, firstly, you might just think all it did was like brighten the clip. But if we click on the clip, the echo effect has a few parameters. So the first one is the echo time. So this is delaying the clip by negative 0.033 seconds. And if I highlight this, one thing I like to do with such minute adjustments is you can use the arrow keys like up and down on your keyboard sometimes, but even that might not be good enough. But you can always type in numbers like I've been doing. So half a second or 1 whole second. You can just experiment based on how fast people are walking, I guess. But if I play this clip out, you'll see it creates an echo, sort of like a ghost image, like a repeat image. But the really cool thing is you can adjust the number of echoes. So that's 1 echo. Here's 2, 3. But one issue is you see that like it's getting really bright. That's why we have these 2 options, the starting intensity and the decay. So if you are working with multiple echoes, you might want to add a bit of a decay. So like 0.5 means that every echo will be half as strong, or like 0.75 maybe, so we don't lose the third echo. And you can also adjust the echo operator, which is sort of like the blending mode. So there's ones like maximum and minimum, and if you just sort of think about it with not common sense, not so common, but if you just think about what those words are saying, like maximum is taking everything and only showing the more like the brighter parts, and minimum is sort of imprinting the darker parts. And as you play this back, what I like to do for echo is really lower that echo time. So like really bring it close together there, like 0.2 or something. And now you almost, let's do negative 0.2 so that you see how I made the echo trail from behind them instead of in front of them.
So putting a negative is going to put it behind whatever the source is. Right.
It's just like adjusting when the echoes start repeating. So this might be a little bit heavy of an effect. So you might see the bar go red and you might need to render it depending on your system. But this is a really cool effect because it creates these motion trails. And like you were saying earlier, especially for something like a music video, this could probably come out great.
Yep. And adding keyframes to this too can make it so that there aren't any trails, and then the trails come in and then go away. So you can get that kind of like hazy effect, or maybe like somebody's like, getting into another dimension, or the way that I actually let's show with the keyframe, and then I'll tell you
demonstrate what Andrew's saying. Like this is from 0 to like negative 0.2, and then I'll take it back to 0. And a neat trick is just hit reset parameter, takes it back to 0. So you'll notice within this couple seconds of this clip, we'll sort of have like a brief moment of haze, and then everything will sort of come back together.
That's cool.
Yeah,
It's
definitely.
very gosh, what movie did they do that in? Like the 30 Days Later. What was the Cillian Murphy with the zombies? 28 Days Later. That's what it
Oh,
was.
I've heard of that one. I haven't
Yeah, I
seen
feel
it.
like they've done that effect a little bit. The way that I've used this effect using the Echo was like a logo that I built that I wanted to do like that 70s like zoom into the camera kind of
Right.
thing. And then I used the Echo and it made a bunch of copies. So it made that like really cool, like, you know, PBS old time 70s glowing flying logo with a bunch of trails on it.
Yeah, I can imagine what you're saying. That's really cool, like with the text coming in. So, and that's just goes to show like the different applications of an effect can create from like a horror or like a hallucination sort of thing, all the way to like a retro 70s sort of vibe. So you can play around with it. So what I did here is I added a black and white effect, just to sort of mask all those little color differences that can sometimes look strange. And I can totally see this being in like a music video or some sort of sad song. I don't know.
Yep, exactly. Yes.
But now I'm going to show some other. So I'm going to show another it's sort of advanced, not advanced, but another sort of option that really ups your flexibility. And that's something that is within the opacity section of every clip. So earlier I just showed you can lower the opacity, but you can also change the blend mode, sort of like how the echo effect was allowing us to change, like they called it the echo operator. So the way in which your clip blends, you actually have the blend mode for every single clip in Premiere. So without even getting too into the effects panel, I can take one clip and let's see, another clip that we've been working on. Why don't we get something fresh and fun to work with? Let's see. How about these? How about this clip? And,
yes, pigeons are definitely fresh and fun.
Pigeons are they even real? It's been conspiracied about. Okay, so what we can do is we can take one clip and we can put it on a track on top of another clip. So you see like track 1, track 2, track 3. That's the beauty of video editing softwares, is they allow you to stack and edit like this. And if I just simply lower the opacity, you see what happens is we've got one clip sort of half showing and the other clip half showing. If I do something like adjust the blending mode, here's where, if you're interested, on my YouTube channel, I have a whole video going over every single blending operator, but it all has to do with like color science. But like I was saying earlier, you can sort of experiment and play around and just sort of take context clues from the name. So darken, for example, will only show the parts of the stair clip that are darker than the pigeon clip. So since the pigeon clip has a lot of like light white concrete and the pigeons are darker, this is the sort of result that we're getting.
Yep.
And they're sort of grouped in families. So if you notice this little line, this delineates sort of all the darkening or the multiplicative effects. And then this delineates all like the lightning and the screening sort of effects. So you can just with blending modes, like a lot of unique effects are created, I'll say, with real video. So for example, like we were talking about wave warp earlier. What if we actually had like real like water waves?
Ooh.
You know, here's some real water rippling, and I can use the water rippling on like a blending mode, like overlay or something, and it's almost like we put the wave warp effect on it, but in fact it's using what's the word, not analog, but like it's using real, it's combining like it's organic, it's an organic effect. Yep. Let's say.
Yeah.
And heck, we could add a wave warp on top of everything. And actually, I think that's another great point that we haven't mentioned yet, is another way to apply effects. So now we've run into this problem. Like, what if I've combined two clips together like so, like this cool, almost looks like graffiti or something. But let's say I want to add an effect on this whole thing. Well, like we said earlier, like we have the source effects. We can add. Let's say I want to add a Posterize Time effect on the whole thing. Well, I can add it on one clip or add it on the other, or try to add it on both. But a great way to apply effects over long portions of a sequence is if we highlight our project media panel and go to File, New, Adjustment Layer. That is right here. Sometimes it gets lost on me. That'll show up in the bottom of your project media panel as an adjustment layer, or depending on how you have it organized at the top. And I can click and drag this over top of as many clips as I want. You see, I'm just stretching out this adjustment layer. And let's say like I just wanted this whole portion to be black and white. Let's keep going to that one. Now, everything that I've done so far, everything that's under this adjustment layer is going to be black and white. Or let's say
that's such a great time saver.
Right. Because a lot of times when you're editing video, you're going to get all these like cut up and like intricate, like layered sequences. And you can't afford to be going into every single cut and trying to make everything blend seamlessly. This is like one layer on top of everything that adjusts everything underneath it. It's also present in Photoshop. So like, let's say also a blur. So like a Gaussian blur. I just wanted this whole effect to be a little, this whole like portion to be blurry. I can do that as well. Maybe I wouldn't necessarily want to do that, but I can. So
the option is there.
Right. It'd probably be better suited with some other effects. But the other thing I'll mention too is in the effect controls panel, order of operation matters. So, geez, this must feel like math class for people, but math is fun. So this is like the fun side of math, like visual
It
arts.
is visual math.
Right. So let me demonstrate a concept too to understand about the effect controls panel is if we're working on this clip of the pigeons, let's say I add a mirror effect. This is a really fun one, actually, going back to the distort video effects folder. It's called mirror. So as you can imagine, it just adds like a mirror image, and you can adjust simply the center and the angle.
We're getting very Doctor Strange here. I like it.
Right. And if you remember what I said earlier with how like sometimes it's not so intuitive to use the sliders for certain effects, this is where I would recommend that tip I said earlier. Just highlight the parameter that you're trying to adjust, click the selection tool, make sure you're in your program window, and now I can actually just like move the center where I want it and adjust the reflection angle. So just so I can see what's going on.
That's cool.
So let's say I have a mirror effect, and then I have, and okay. So why don't I jump into this? The cool part about the effects panel is that you can stack effects. So you might think, okay, I added a mirror effect. I've created a mirror. Well, we could do it again. Let's add another mirror effect. And this time let's flip it vertically, right? So 90 degrees. So now we've created an effect with the mirror effect that we couldn't create just with one instance of the effect.
Whoa.
Right. And now we've done this. This is sort of like a classic kaleidoscopic sort of effect. And we did it just simply by stacking the same effect. And I'd say there's no limit. I guess like you might start to lag if you apply like 100 effects. But
what happens if you put a keyframe on this kind of effects, right? Because I think the effects we've looked at before were more like, yeah, you could fade it in and out. What happens if there's a keyframe on this mirror? What does that look like?
Right. Yeah, we could try it out. And one thing that you can always do, like even without putting the keyframe, like you can see that animations might look like something like this. So what if we have the mirror sort of expanding out from the center? So let's add a stopwatch icon.
These pigeons look so cursed.
Yeah, we might be cursing the viewers here. And let's slowly expand out all the way back to, I guess, the original clip. So now when I play this, um, let's make it go even slower.
Whoa.
Right, we're sort of getting, I guess that's cool, like the concrete is sort of like opening up out of itself.
That's so
It's
cool.
sort of like printing itself, you know?
Yep.
And we can add another effect on top. And actually what you just said is a great point. Or this is a great way to demonstrate my next point. You see how the first mirror effect is the one that has the keyframes, right?
Hmm.
So when I add another mirror effect, we actually get that cool like expanding out effect both ways. There's sort of like a line if you imagine it. However, if I flipped it, so if I put the second mirror effect, I'm just clicking and dragging, like rearrange them so that the one with the keyframes is on top. Now we get a slightly different effect. And actually, I'll demonstrate it in a better way.
Interesting.
Right, I'll demonstrate it in an even easier to see way. So here's an effect called offset. Let's pull up a different clip here. All right, so here's an effect called offset. So what this does, it's in the distort folder, so it's obviously another like sort of distorted sort of effect. You can shift the center of a clip. So of course, with every effect, there's creative uses or functional uses. I'm sure there's functional uses to this where you need to shift the edge a little bit. But in this case, I'm going to be demonstrating like sort of a creative use. So let's sort of split the clip like into four ways. And, you know, this one's cool because it has a blend feature. And now let's add like a Gaussian blur, or yeah, let's add a Gaussian blur. So if I add the blur on top of everything, by the way, fun fact, it's called Gaussian blur because like some mathematician, his last name was Gauss. They don't just make stuff up in Premiere, I promise. So if we blur all of this, we see that the blur applies last. So we get the offset first, then the blur. However, if I change it so that the offset is first, you see a clearly different effect is happening. First, it's blurring, and then it's shifting the edge over, right? So that's just one thing to keep in mind, not only with like the creative possibilities, but just that order of operation matters. So like the things that are being applied first are happening first, and that changes effects dramatically. All right, so let's jump into another of my favorite effects, and that one is called Strobe. So, and I want to sort of mix it with others. So now we're jumping into the stylized video effects folder. And if I grab, let's grab this clip here. Work more organized than me, guys. I'm messy because I'm just dealing with effects. All right.
That's it. Do as I do, not as I say.
Right. So here's a cool effect called Strobe Light. And the reason I want to mention this is because of all the different creative possibilities that could go into it. And maybe this is where we can build up a transition, or like maybe we can do a transition here. So Strobe Light, by default, when you add it onto the clip, you might think like, well, this is a bit of a silly effect. Like it's just flashing a white screen like every half a second.
Yep.
Right. Like does anyone ever want to do that? But what we have inside of the Strobe Light is, and you'll notice like when I had both the audio highlighted and the video, that's why it showed me the audio effect parameters, just so people understand what's going on. It's those little things that trip people up.
Yep.
Just always remember what you have highlighted. So the Strobe Light effect has a lot of really cool options. So firstly, you can strobe a color, right? Maybe strobe to white or black, and you get your standard thing like this. That could be kind of cool. And yes, before anyone asks, like, what if we just keyframe the color to just keep changing? So like from red to green.
Oh, interesting. So then it will shift the color each time it flashes.
And this is actually, I'll make another point here to note, because these keyframes are called linear keyframes, it will try to smoothly go from one color to the other. Let me just let me make it not strobe at all. Let me make it let me make it just sustain on the color. You'll notice with linear keyframes, it smoothly
Transitions,
goes
yeah.
right, and that's pretty useful. That's why when we did the effects earlier, it slowly went from one amount to the other amount, and it was all smooth and gradual. If we ever right click on any keyframe, we have the option to change it to a hold keyframe, and you'll notice this changes it from diamond to more of a sometimes a squarish shape. And now what we're telling Premiere is don't change to the next color or parameter until you actually get to that keyframe. So this is just going to be red, and then until we get to the next keyframe, it's just going to be green, and so on. So that slightly changes the effect. So if we were trying to create like some sort of multicolored strobe, and I guess strobe, or I'm not going to make it strobe too fast for anyone that has sensitivity, but now we're getting like different color strobes, whereas if they were all linear keyframes, we would get like slightly like slowly ramping up different colors.
Oh, that's cool.
Right, which in my opinion that looks nicer in this case, but it's always good to know the tools. And obviously this effect, this is not what we would really use the strobe effect for. But the other thing that we can do with strobe, instead of strobing a color, we can just simply make the layer transparent. So we can just forget about all this color stuff, and it might look like it's just strobing to black, but that's just because that's how Premiere displays black. So if I put another clip underneath this, let's say there's some overlap between these. Now what's going to be happening is the top layer is going to be strobing transparent. And this, you can already imagine, can be very useful for transitions or cool like flash between two scenes. But one thing about this is the strobe duration. So by default, it's just half a second on every 1 second. So typically, for a cool strobe effect, you might want it to be a little faster. So maybe we do 0.2 seconds on every 0.4 seconds. And let's make a transition out of it. So instead of doing it over the whole clip, I'll actually cut the clip at this point here. I'll make this little overlap. I'll press C to grab my eraser tool, and I'll add a little cut there. And as we were saying earlier, whenever you're in the effect control panel, you can always highlight clips and delete. You can highlight effect names and delete them, or you can, right click, remove attributes, just remove everything. Because I want this to first be a normal clip, and then I want to strobe into the second clip. So this is what it looks like right now. Sort of slow and awkward, but what if we made it a bit faster? So let's see, 0.1, 0.2, and now we sort of create this strobe transition. Maybe I want to make it a little shorter, like a little flicker transition, and that's a big this might be like a simple effect that we created, but we've just opened up a big world of possibilities now from your standard sort of editing workflow where you have two clips together. If you want to add a transition between them, well, by default it's a cut, or like if you right click and add the default transition, you have something like a cross dissolve.
Yep. It's just like a really cool hard cross dissolve flicker effect. That's really cool.
Right. But the thing to even notice is that we didn't have to do it in this standard way where we open the video transitions folder, we open the dissolve folder, and we add like a dissolve, and it goes only in between the clips. What we've just done is we've created a transition sort of in a manual custom way where we used keyframes and we overlap the clips on top of each other. And now I can do things like, instead of just dissolves and the basic transitions, I can do any sort of combination of effects. So that's a couple applications of the strobe effect. But actually recently I've been playing with the strobe, this cool idea of the strobe effect with the make layer transparent feature. And I'll actually tie it back into uh, one of our earlier time effects. So let's say we have this walking clip and we create two instances of this clip. So if I click and, well, I'm using a shortcut. If you hold Option and click and drag any clips, it'll create a duplication of it. Or you can always,
which is a crossover from other Adobe programs, like we said, that
uh,
there's a lot of similarities.
oh, nice. Is that like Illustrator?
Yep, yeah, Illustrator, Photoshop, holding that Alter Option makes a copy instead of just dragging the one.
Yeah, that's actually, I didn't even know that. And that's really good to know. And that should also like inspire people that are scared to learn After Effects or something. Like maybe you already know more than you think. So now we have two copies of the same clip, right? And actually, like a funny thing, like maybe you might not have thought of this is we know that the time effect, like the echo, works by creating like duplications of the clip that are set on blending modes at a slightly staggered time. Now, I can actually just do that by hand too. Like I can just slightly make this clip start a little bit earlier. I'm just zooming in here. Let's slightly make this clip start a little earlier, and let's set it to a lower opacity. If you notice, I've just created my own echo. I'm just doing everything by hand, and that's sort of interesting to know. See, like we didn't even use any effect except blending modes.
That's trippy.
Right. And if you really want to get into creating like powerful custom effects, like you have to think outside of the box like this, where you open up a lot of different creative possibilities. So aside from just recreating an echo effect that we can create regardless, we can start thinking about what if we blend one clip into the other, or what if we blend the same clip onto itself at different opacities, blending modes, or with something different about them. So for example, let's say we add a blur onto this. So just your standard Gaussian blur. And I'm not even going to stagger the time. I'm going to keep everything exactly how it is. We can almost create like a blurry, like dreamy look, or set it to screen or something. And
oh wow,
right, and then also you can play around with masks too. So like one thing I did with, let me turn the opacity up. Oh, this sort of adds like a cool look. One thing I did is, if you just want to apply this onto the edge, if I create like a ellipse mask and invert the mask and just add like a whole lot of feather, and
we can do like a nice little vignette kind of thing.
Right, expand it out a whole lot. There's tools in Premiere to just create your standard vignette, but in this way you can create maybe like a unique vignette that has
a premium vignette.
Right, like that has more effects on top than what you can normally create. And you also have the option to animate them, but maybe we're getting too ahead of ourselves, and we can save some of that craziness for day 2. But I mean, here you have like almost like a frosted lens, or like a sort of like perspective, first person perspective or something. And one thing that I've been playing with the strobe effect is using this idea that it strobes. You can make the layer transparent without making a whole bunch of cuts.
Yep.
And using that in combination. So let me just see, I've made a mess of things. Let me just remove all attributes and
stacks of effects.
Right. So let's start back to one of our building blocks that we did with Posterize Time. So we know that Posterize Time, I guess it doesn't really depend which one you added on. We know that Posterize Time, we can make things go at a slower frame rate. So like 3 frames per second.
Okay.
And we get this, oh, I gotta make sure the visibility is turned on. We get this cool like stop motion sort of effect. Okay, now the basics, like we can just lower the opacity and we get a combination of the two. So stop motion effect plus the original clip playing.
Whoa.
Right. Or
This looks like we're like dying in a video game. I don't know why, but that effect like reminds me of like when you get flashbanged in like a Call of Duty or something.
yeah. Well, the reason it reminds you of that is because that is basically like what they do is they just show like screenshots or not like still frames, like flashing still frames at like a lower opacity.
Yep.
But what I thought was cool is that I thought, what if we put a strobe light effect on, like, instead of using the strobe to make a color flash, we can use it as sort of a way to cut the clip in like certain random intervals without manually making a million cuts. So there's this cool tool that we didn't touch on with strobe light, that's random strobe probability. So earlier we just did like, okay, on every half second, off every half, or off on every half for every 1 second. But we can also add a random strobe. So like, here's the percent that every so often a random frame, like a random strobe will happen. So we can create this sort of jittery cut effect. So if I turn off what's ever underneath, okay, that's operating on color. But if we make it transparent, we get that. Okay, a bit like fast and a bit random, and it would be really hard to make those cuts. But now if we bring the original clip back on underneath, and we try to stay, if you stay visualizing what's going on here, we have the original clip, and then we have a clip where all we've done is adjust the frame rate. So all we've done is make it look stop motion. And then we've added a strobe effect where we are cutting in and out of the slower frame rates at a very random and jittery pace. I thought that would be cool to create a cool glitch sort of effect.
Oh yeah.
Right. So when you play this back, you get this cool glitch happening.
Oh, that's dope.
Right. And it almost looks like lagging footage, but you can play around with it and see. And you get this cool like random glitch sort of feel. And if you really want to tell the difference between what's going on or not, like let's say I added a color tint to it. I'll add some food dye so you can see what's going on. If we make this clip like more red, you could see the parts that are flashing sort of. But
that's interesting.
Right. My idea with it was that we're going to keep almost everything exactly the same. We're just going to only flash. We're only going to like go in and out of the slower frame rate versus the real frame rate. And I thought that might create some cool effects, which it does create like a cool glitch effect. But you could see this sort of way that we're combining things together. So I'm going to delete those. So we've combined a couple of cool effects. But let's get into a few more. And I would love to know if everyone in the chat, like if I could.
Yeah, so there's a great question that came in that I've been waiting for a break for.
Sure.
Our friend Voodoo Val said, can you give us a pro tip or insight onto something that changed your workflow when you learned it? Something that you learned or saw and you're like, oh my gosh, I've been doing this wrong for so long, or like, this is going to save me so much time. Do you have anything off the top of your head that like just blew your mind when you learned it?
Well, definitely some of those things that I've already tried to mention, like that are really useful are, like, for example, this, I've already said it, but it might seem trivial, but just the fact that you can click on an actual parameter and make sure you're in the program window, and that you can move things around visually, really changed my workflow a lot, because sometimes it's just sort of weird to just be moving around with sliders, and to be able to click and drag effects in Premiere is really useful. For example, I'll show you one useful application of that. So like there's an effect called it's in the let's close this. It's in the transform or stylize. Let's see. I think it's called basic 3D. Oh, perspective. It's in the perspective folder, right? So this is called basic 3D.
Okay.
Okay. So kind of like what you're saying earlier with like the old school like 70s sort of clip
Oh
or
yeah,
edit.
that's it right there. That's
Right,
public
right,
access news right there.
right. So let's say like this sort of thing. We've all seen this sort of thing. Um, it's sort of like not awkward, but it's a bit strange sometimes to do this way. Oh, actually, I think the one I'm looking for is called. Let's see. Is it Basic 3D? Oh, I'm in Basic 3D. Wow. Okay. So the cool thing with the being able to select a parameter and adjust it, there's a different one where it's like, oh, it's probably in the distort folder. Corner pin.
Got
Okay.
it.
Sorry. Okay, but Basic 3D is a cool effect too. But let's do corner pin, and let me give you an example. Wish I had like a billboard. Okay, here we go. A static shot, and let's say I wanted to use the corner pin effect on, let's say I'm making like a text box. Okay. And I have some text or logos. This is where we're going to be working in the essential graphics panel, which is really useful in Premiere. But we can create like simple little text and graphics. And let's say I want to sort of place this on a cool perspective on this stair ramp. One effect is called the corner pin effect. And you might be familiar with this from Photoshop. But the corner pin effect has 4 corners. So here's like where the workflow thing really helps, right? If you do it the slider way, you adjust the X and Y axis of the upper left corner, upper right corner.
That would be really hard
left.
to like get it at the right angle, and yeah.
Right. So you could do it like but it's really hard to visualize what's going on.
Yep.
Whereas this little workflow tip, when I learned it, it's just really useful. Just make sure your selection tool is active, you're in the program window, and you highlight the parameter that you want. And let me not mess everything up too. If you click the corner pin upper left program window, yeah, so I can adjust the parameters like this, and it's a little tricky because this square doesn't fill up the whole shape. Just as a more this might look a little nonsensical, but if I take a video clip, for example, or a photo, and let's take a photo, for example. Okay, let's take this photo, and okay, so let's say for some reason, okay, this little let's just put it on the stairs. So corner pin on the stairs.
Twinsies.
Right.
My Starbucks is literally on my desk right there.
Okay, great. That's actually a really cool it's a really cool place in Japan. This is all footage, a lot of footage. I went to Japan, and there's a really cool view of, I think it's called Shibuya Crossing, or I can't remember.
Oh, where it has the like X cross that everyone walks across, that one?
It's just one of the busiest crosswalks in the world, and it's like really an amazing experience to see it. But there's a Starbucks that you could like see. It's like, what a great location. You could just sit there and see. I only went there so I could like watch.
That's
and
awesome.
Get time-lapse footage. Okay, so here we have the video clip, and it's so much easier when I can just, let me actually know what's going on. All right. So it's so much easier when I can just click on upper left program window and just click and drag this corner to where it needs to be, and click. Things are lagging a little bit because this image is probably like 10,000 pixels.
Yep.
But you could see I could just click and drag these corners where they need to be.
And will apply perfectly to those angles. Yeah, this is very familiar from Photoshop, which is interesting. I would have never thought this was something you could do in video.
Right. And once my computer finishes like almost blowing up, actually it made it. But you could see here, like if you wanted to apply an image onto a billboard or something, it's just a lot more intuitive to do it that way. I probably didn't make a great case for it, but let me think of some other ones that some workflow ones. But yeah, the other thing I was gonna say, if anyone in the comments, is anyone in the comments like seeing different possibilities that they didn't realize were possible, or like we all knew that we can click and drag a clip and whatnot, but I hope I'm showing some things that like, oh, I didn't know you could stack two clips and sort of like blend the opacity and then add keyframes or hold
Totally. Yeah.
keyframes.
Chat. Let us know. Let us know if you're working on something, and maybe if you're using some cool effects that you have come up with, how you've combined those. Let us know in the chat. And I have a question for you, Justin.
Sure.
Is there a go-to that is like your go-to set of effects, right? If you're doing a video and I'm watching it and I'm like, oh, that's totally a Justin thing. Is there something that you just find yourself using again and again and again?
Right. So I think the ones that well, obviously I could plug like my own pack. I have my own preset
Oh yeah, go
pack.
for it. Do it.
So I have my own preset pack where I've, gone through all this like laborious mathematics stuff and keyframed and created sort of like some of, I think, most common, most like functional and useful effects, because sometimes you don't always want like a crazy distortion or something weird happening. So if I could just show you some, like here's like a blinking effect that I made. So blinking open and close. We just apply it on the first clip and the next clip, and it'll transition in like a cool blinking way. And
oh, cool.
Right. And if you notice, it's not just like it almost has like a gradual adjustment of speed. And that's something that I did using a little bit more advanced option, and that's called like a velocity or sort of ramping of the keyframes. So remember how we said we can go linear or hold? You also have the option to sort of speed ramp the keyframes so that they start off one way and then gradually quickly go the other way, which can add that nice little like elegant like touch.
Yep. And if you're talking about speed ramping, you don't know what speed ramping is. The thing that I always use as the example is like, if you've seen 300, that's speed ramping, to where like the fight's happening and then it does like the slow and then goes back into the fast. Or like Transformers is the one that really made speed ramping a big deal. Is it's kind of that like going to slow, but not a hard cut. It's kind of that like quick slow down or quick speed up.
Right. And I know that we're sort of focusing all on effects today, but truly for any editors out there, don't overwhelm yourself with always thinking everything needs like so much. Like truly remember, by default, there's just the cut, which is, if you're going to ask me like what's like the go-to, like actually it's just like the cut. And even in the cut, there's little like elegant ways that you can do it. For example, something known as a J cut or an L cut, where you have,
oh, what's the difference between those? I haven't heard those terms before.
Right. So like this is one where you'll have the audio of a clip come in before the video. So if you've ever, I'm sure you've seen where you're watching a movie and like one clip will be playing. Let me get two clips here. So
the example that I have in my brain of what you're about to do is like a nature documentary, to where it like has the person like talking on a black screen and they're like, the world is waking up, and you can hear like the birds chirping and then it cuts to the birds. Is that kind of the thing that we're doing?
Right. So if you could just imagine like these two clips, like maybe it's like beeping busy sounds, and then like slowly you start to hear like walking loud crowd sounds before the clip even comes in, and then cut to this. And the reason it's called a J or L cut is it sort of looks like a J in the way that the audio comes in first, or an L if you did it the other way, where the audio like extends past. So like you'll hear a train coming with the audio and then it cuts to the train,
Interesting. Yeah. And that's a great way to kind of like foreshadow what's coming, to give just that extra transition. So it's not the hard cut. It's like, oh, you're anticipating what's coming and here it is.
Right. So, and I say all that whole point just to mention, like, even within just something like, oh, it's just the default cut, you have like variations of it and things to know. And, even like a cut to black, and then cutting into the next clip after like some tension or something. So that's one. And then another like go-to that I think everyone should always know is just like the default cross dissolve. So these are obviously not groundbreaking stuff, but most of the time, you don't want like a crazy like whip or zoom.
Yep.
But
do you know if you can change, because what was your workflow to just right click and add that? Because whenever
Right.
I'm editing, I always am like dragging in cross dissolves. How did you just add that in there?
Actually, so that's another like good workflow tip is you can actually set the default transition. So if you go to video transitions, let's say for some reason like you want to be doing additive dissolves. So if you notice like another thing with the little icons Premiere telling you information, the cross dissolve has a blue box around it. That means that that's the default transition.
Oh,
right. Let's say you wanted everything to actually be additive dissolve. You can right click and set that as the default transition. And then instead of clicking and dragging it, you can always just right click, apply default transition. And that's very useful.
oh, that's really cool.
Right. And actually I did a stream with Adobe. Maybe people can find it in a playlist on my channel where I did a whole transitions masterclass. So you can sort of, you could see like there's within transitions, you have the effect controls menu as well and all that, but maybe we'll save that and focus on effects. But another final point I was going to make is that even within basic things like a cross dissolve, you can adjust the duration of them to make it more than just a cross dissolve. Like let's say we did like a really long cross dissolve. This is a common thing that you might see with like in a movie where like the scene is changing really slowly, like a train passing by, and for a long period of time we sort of get a mix of the 50% of the two shots, and maybe it can be like some sort of contemplative scene. But using this point, let's also point out another cool thing you can do. So I was showing off some of the transitions that I've made as custom transitions.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that I think a lot of people don't realize, so here's one I did where it's like a push transition. So this one's cool. We'll just sort of we'll sort of whip down. And
oh, cool.
Right. The way that I built this, and another tip, like a workflow tip, if you go frame by frame on any video or music video or anything you're watching, like, and you're trying to figure out like how did they do that, take it, pause the video and try to go frame by frame, and you can sort of see like, oh, okay, it looks like they started to add a directional blur. Yep. It looks like they keyframed that directional blur to start at 0 and get really intense. And then it also looks like they started to add like an offset or a position effect, which are all effects that I've showed you so far. And then it looks like they scaled back those keyframes, right? Because that is how this effect was built. So going frame by frame can often reveal the secrets. If you know the building blocks already, you can sort of pick apart any effect and sort of reveal the secrets of it, which is really
and that's why it's so important to understand, like we said at the beginning, it's to understand the pieces that you're working with, so that when you see an effect that you like, you can look at it like this and think, okay, what are the elements that are going in here? And you're like, okay, I know what the effects are, which of those are being used to achieve this? Like, what's the stack to make this? And I love that you just broke it down, that it was the directional blur, we saw some offset, some movement happening. It's all about being able to like break those down and understand how they work.
Right. So let me show people how you can actually start to combine like and customize things that you might just think are like default transitions. So within the video transitions folder, you have like a lot of things like pushes and slides. So if we were to try to create an effect like the one we just saw, if I add this push effect onto this clip, sometimes it can be a little bit awkward, right? Like
Star Wars wipe.
Right. Like star wipe, and like, a lot of times default transitions, they require a little bit more.
Yep.
But what we can do is we can start with something like the default transition. And let me just make sure I remove all of this. We can start with the default transition, and we can then use what we learned to apply things over top. So, uh,
Oh,
right. So one thing, like when I mentioned the adjustment layer earlier, is like, let's say I create an adjustment layer and just use it sort of in a very specific way. Probably name your things if you want to be organized. If I use it just like in a specific way, like let's say I just sort of want to smooth over this cut so it's not so rough, and I don't want to apply keyframes onto each clip, I can go to something like the directional blur that we just talked about, and that's another cool one. So Gaussian blur, it sort of just blurs generally. Directional blur is cool because you can blur in a certain direction. And if we want to sort of wipe out this seam, we can blur in a horizontal direction. So like 90 degrees, I'll just type it in. And, you know, if you blur enough, you can't really see the seam anymore. But you don't want it to start like that and, you know, it looks a little clunky. That's where you can use keyframes. So you could you can go to the middle of the clip, make the blur length quite high, and then at the beginning of the clip, if you notice the transition, like this little, I call it a piece of tape. I don't know what it actually is. This little yellow piece of tape. So we know it starts there. So we want to start our blur at 0 right there. And then we have a push happening. And then we have a blur growing.
Oh, wow.
And then we have a push stopping, and we can take our blur back to 0. So what we've done now is we've used the adjustment layer and keyframed effects to take a standard transition that comes with Premiere that you might never use the way it is, and we've sort of made it our own. Obviously, you might still want to tweak. It's maybe a little slow in my opinion, but you could always make it faster. So,
and this is a great example of what we were just talking about speed ramping. So when you play this, you can see that it has a hard start and a hard stop. And it almost feels like it goes like click and then click at the end, and changing those keyframes to be into not necessarily like the sharp ones. I believe that it's like the ease that you can turn on, right? Or changing the interpolation there.
Yeah, a very simple way. Like if you don't, like, one option is, you drop down the menu, you get into all these like advanced graphs, and I'll tell you, like, it's really easy to just make things get really wonky here because
it's easy to ruin it.
It's easy to ruin it, yeah, because it's very like delicate. But one thing I do all the time is just simply do like a ease out and an ease in, and if you look at the graph, it sort of does it for you, and now we get sort of like a smooth ramp instead of like just your static like up and down. And just by squeezing everything in faster as well, I could totally see this being used in like any, like a TV show or like a documentary or like a YouTube video. You could totally see the scene changing like that, and that's just by combining our one effect already and then using what we know about keyframes and using like what we know about, how could I sort of create a feel of motion and get rid of this annoying seam. We can just use the directional blur effect with some keyframes and solve our problems there. So
that's so cool to see. And that's, again, why I love watching Adobe Live and why I love having people on Adobe Live is like seeing something that right? You're like, oh, the quick like wipe fade or whatever we've seen a million times. And then we drop an effect and we're like, okay, that's not it. And then you drop another effect and another effect. You're like, oh, that's all it is it's just those 3 things. It's not some crazy like camera trick. It's just 3 stacked things with, a couple clicks. You can achieve that same style.
Right. And even if I delete the push, we can use this same method just with like an adjustment layer over the cut to create all sorts of custom transitions. I think I think it even looks better without the push, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like that looks great. And you could do the same thing like with even just like a normal blur. Like there is no built-in Gaussian blur transition as far as I know. I don't think there is, but by simply starting at the cut, adding blur, adding a keyframe, And then like depending on how slow you want it to be, starting there and ending there, you can create your own custom transitions very easily, you know?
Yep.
Uh,
That's interesting. This is very these transitions remind me of that show How It's Made, where they're like kind
yeah,
of just going through different shots, you know, that it's like, and then the wafers go underneath the caramel, and it's got like those kind of cut throughs.
absolutely. Like that's why I said like TV show, like it's got
Yep.
that sort of feel.
And I
Um,
love that it's adding some kind of uniqueness. Like I think that a lot of video editors have a hard time finding how to inject kind of their uniqueness or their editing style into a video. This could be a great way to do it, right? We all need transitions. There's always ways that you need to put clips together. Of kind of stacking the effects can make it so that it feels a little more you. It can be something fun. You can kind of develop your workflow by having the effects that you use on your cuts and stringing your clips together.
right. That's the thing. Like when you just use default effects, like uh, sometimes it can look a little bit default or what, I don't know what the word is, standard.
Yes.
And sometimes the difference between
Oh.
a nice cat cafe, sometimes the difference between like uh, a very professional looking edit and one that maybe looks a bit um, off is just the slightest tweaks, like just the slightest keyframe tweak or just a little bit of blur, you know, can take your edit from rough to very smooth. So why don't we try to create a couple more cool final effects here? Because we've
Cool.
only really touched on maybe like 5 effects, but we've really covered, I think, today a lot of the principles
Oh yeah,
that.
I think that I mean I've learned a ton, and I think that a lot of people in chat have been saying they're learning that they're changing their workflows. We had a couple people that were illustrators that make content to show the process that are going to use a lot of these effects and transitions. But I think it's cool to kind of drop them onto something that's a process video to not make it just a screen recording, right? You can really zazz it up with some of these effects.
Right, absolutely. And I guess one thing I'll say is, or why don't we show how to build and save our own? So if
Okay, let's
anyone's
do that.
just,
Yep, we
if
got about
anyone's
20 minutes left, by the way. So that's a perfect transition to get started.
right, so if anyone's just watching this one stream, you sort of want to take something home away from this today that I think could be really useful, and this will be like the final good solid answer to what's the best workflow thing is let's build our own presets so we don't have to always do all this stuff every time. So here's an interesting effect. Let's try to go for like a comic book sort of look. So
Cool.
if we go to the video effects folder, actually there's an interesting folder called obsolete. It's not quite what you'd think. You think like everything in here is junk, but a lot of stuff is in here. It's just, I think like some of the code needs to be shifted over to like some technical reason they're in here, or they're phasing it out and phasing in something that's replacing it. But there's some pretty cool ones in here, and I think there's an effect called checkerboard. So let's
Oh yes,
look.
I just saw it.
Right. So I don't know why it's in the obsolete folder. I like the checkerboard effect, but maybe
Save checkerboard.
they might need to update the code, or maybe they're working on some technical things. So the checkerboard effect this used to be in a folder called generate. So it's like a generative effect. It just generates this pattern, and you can adjust the scale or width of it. We don't want to make anyone dizzy. So what I will do with the checkerboard effect is I will just add like a little checkerboard dot, and I will set the blending mode of this, because some effects have blending modes built right in with them. I'll set the blending mode of this to maybe something like multiply, and I'll make the color black instead of white. So I will lower this checkerboard dot quite a bit. I'm not sure, depending on how you're viewing this on your stream, it might be hard to see. Maybe this wasn't the best effect for anyone watching on mobile, but normally I would probably make it pretty low because I can see it, but just so that people can see what's going on, I'll make it
trying to do like a halftone kind of
right. I'll make it
style.
sort of large. Yeah. So I mean, coming from Illustrator, you must be familiar with this sort of style. Like the halftone style is pretty popular. And then let's say we also want to add like a color tint. So in the color correction folder, I'll actually drop it down just so people can see everything. In the color correction folder, there's something called tint. And this just allows you to tint one color to the other. So Let's say, I don't know, let's just see what appeals to us. Let's try like a black and an orange maybe. And we can also lower the amount of tint. So maybe we can just tint a little bit. But if I play this clip back, we have, maybe I don't know if I love the tint that much, but the point here is that we're going to be creating a custom preset. So we have that. And then there's also an effect called posterize. Oh, so this is a good one to tie in. So posterize time, posterize the frame rate.
Yep.
And in the stylize folder, there's an effect called posterize. This posterizes like the colors within the clip.
Yep.
So
Which also carries over from Photoshop and Illustrator.
Right. So if I just turn everything off, and that's using the FX badges like we mentioned. If I turn everything off, and I can adjust the levels of this, so we can make it like seem more or less like an illustrated effect. And here's also a great time to demonstrate the order of operations thing. So one little trick I'll use is I'll add a Gaussian blur onto this.
Okay.
Before I add the posterize time. So what this will do is it'll sort of smooth things out and smooth out the edges a little bit, if you notice.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. So it's giving you less hard edges and more kind of just general clumps of color.
Right. So these really fine furs that are ending up looking like noise, just a little bit of Gaussian blur before we posterize. The posterize sort of still brings us back that hard final edge, but we don't, we sort of smooth out the image. And the tint I'll put after to sort of, I'm not sure exactly how I feel about the tint, but what I'm aiming for, my idea is to smooth out all the rough colors that were created with posterize. Mm-hmm. And then we can put the checkerboard on top of everything and put it on multiply, maybe put the opacity a little lower. And we can sort of call this our comic book effect. We could choose to do it with or without black and white, right? Okay, so I think that's kind of interesting, right? We've created like a semi comic book effect. The idea is now we don't want to do this every single time. We don't want to always copy and paste this, but let's say we know that we want to use this effect many times throughout like certain projects if we're like a comic book creator or something. I can create a preset of all these so that I have one drag and drop comic book effect. So what I'll do in the effect controls panel is I'll highlight all of the effects. So I'm just holding shift and clicking and actually I think it's command. I'm holding command. It might be different if you're on PC, but we're highlighting all of them. And then we're going to right click and save preset. And then this is going to allow us to give it a name. So I'll call this one like comic book look. And I'll actually show you guys what this whole type thing is. Because we don't have any keyframes and this is just a static effect, we don't have to worry about that, but I'll mention that perhaps after or maybe even in tomorrow's stream. And we can even give it a description if we want, if you're the super organized type.
I wish not a lot of presets, I feel like in other Adobe programs have the option for like a description box like this. And I wish that it was everywhere. Like I would put descriptions on everything on all of my Photoshop presets. And Voodoo Val, who's in our chat, Val's like a Photoshop master. Val, can you do this in Photoshop? Can you do this in other programs? Because I love the idea of adding a description. I just think it's like the smartest thing.
Yeah. Honestly, kudos to you if you're like the super organized type. Actually, though, I will say, so firstly, I'll press OK here. And what you'll notice is this preset now appears in the preset panel, which has a little star next to it. And if you hover over it, you'll see the description you added as a comic book look. And actually, one thing that I did do is for my effects packs, which I sell on my website, I do have a description for all of them.
Hey, he's organized.
Yeah, so I was sort of like, downplaying myself, but I have a description for all of them. And this idea was sort of inspired by, I have this effect called CRT style. It's sort of like a CRT TV.
Oh, yeah.
what does that stand for? Cathode ray tube? I don't know.
Yep, cathode ray tube. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
totally it.
this one I probably couldn't recreate on stream because I tweaked it for a while, but I used a combination of like a grid effect and an extract and a glitch effect. Um, I'm pretty proud of this effect. I think it's pretty cool. And yeah, I have the description there. It transforms the image into a CRT inspired look. You know.
What's getting me with this one is the banding on the edges. Like, it
Right.
is so perfect for that effect to have just that little bit on the edge that's being weird. You nailed it with this look. Like, that's really cool that you can achieve something that like is wrong in the right way, right? Like that it's like, oh no, this video is totally wrong, but it's a new video that's looking old and it's wrong in the right way. It's cool.
Right. And yeah, so that's the thing. Like for anyone watching the stream, you know, creating things like live on a scratch, maybe, you know, things aren't tweaked perfectly. Maybe if you can equate it to a recipe, maybe I'd put less sugar or more salt or whatever you want to say. But the idea is now that we have this comic book look in our presets, and if I was to apply any other clip, I can simply click and drag this comic book look preset onto this new clip and get the same thing going on without, without having to adjust every single parameter and every single keyframe. And actually, the really cool part though is, although this is a preset and I added onto a whole new clip, now I can still go in the effect controls panel, and let's say if for this effect I didn't want it to be black and white, or I wanted to make the checkerboard pattern a little bit different, you still have the option to adjust every single thing about every parameter. So you can start from a preset base and then customize it to look like whatever else you wanted after that.
That's cool.
So the flexibility is still definitely all there. And then
go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I was gonna say, and then when you have like several presets, you can always like export them out and have, let's say you have like your 5 favorite presets that you like you can export them out into their own little like bundle or pack, and you know, you can keep those with you on whatever computer, or you can share those with your team, or do whatever you're looking at. And this is also where like people like myself or whoever else you may know has presets. You can import presets with this button. So you can download a pack like mine and import it in, and then it'll automatically load up all of them into a folder, and you can play around with some of the effects that you know you or other people have created. So here's another one that I've done that I think is interesting. It's like a Super 8 camera look.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll try a different clip.
Oh, wow. The tones on that got so delicious.
Right. Sometimes, obviously, some things work better on some clips than other. Like, for example, here's like one with maybe more lights. So if I add a Super 8 film camera look, what we've done here is we've created like a little faux crop. Actually, if I just take you to the effect controls panel, I can break down the whole thing for you. So Posterize Time is the first effect. Let me turn off all the FX badges to show you how this thing was made. So Posterize Time, and this is actually really neat. Like, remember how we were using Posterize Time to create a stop motion look?
Mm-hmm.
What we've done with the Posterize Time in this case is, instead of taking it all the way down to like 2 or 3, we've just lowered it a little bit, kind of like to give you that reminiscent look of like an old Super 8 film camera that doesn't quite shoot like just as smoothly as you'd like. It's just like ever so slightly choppy. And then we've added a little bit of Gaussian blur, so just like 7, just like a little bit, just like those, like an old camera that was a little blurry. And then we added a noise, so just to add like a little bit of grain. So now it's a little, it's
because we're shooting on film now instead of digital. Yep.
Right. Already now we've taken it from like digital to, I think it almost looks like film. You know.
Oh yeah.
It's a little blurry. It's a little frame rate, and then you know I get a little advanced, or I get a little like play around with the color. So I added something called a solid composite. So this basically just gives you a solid color layer to play with, and you can set it on blending modes. So I just used a little trick where you set a blending mode to exclusion, and you can sort of like green up the shadows.
Yep,
so to
just
speak.
like film.
right? And then I added a color balance effect, which because I was making a preset, I had to contain myself to only using effects. Whereas if you have the luxury of working on your own project and you're not like shipping out a preset, you can always go to the Lumetri color panel instead, and you have like all of these options and flexibilities. Um, but that just goes to show you there's always more than one way to do things in most all of the editing programs. And then just to finish it off, I added like a little crop on the edges just so it looks more like the square ratio. It might not be technically correct, but that gives us our final film look where we've went from our original clip to now it looks like a little bit more like it was shot on film. And
It like full on aged it back decades. Like that's so weird to see how a couple different effects can make it look so authentic to an old film camera.
right, and this is something that you wouldn't want to do every single time, right? Like I think that took me, like maybe a few days of tweaking things and trying to figure things out and testing it on like many different clips so that when I got it just quite right, I can apply it onto like whatever clip, and it really I haven't looked at this in a bit, but it really does take you back a little bit, like
Yeah.
the quality of it.
What would be the difference in use case to like if you have a bunch of clips that you want to apply this kind of look to? What would be the difference between like putting this effect on every clip or like trying to put the adjustment layer on top? Is it easier to use just dropping the preset on there, or would you want to like try to do an adjustment? What's kind of the overarching difference between those two?
I'd say using adjustment layers when you can is um, probably pretty useful and fast, especially because it's over a whole sequence. There are a few limitations with adjustment layers. So if you recall, like what I was mentioning about order of operations mattering, um, with adjustment layers, for example, let's say I go to an adjustment layer and I increase the scale of the adjustment layer, you won't notice anything happening because it's not increasing the scale of everything underneath.
Yep.
It's increasing the scale of the adjustment layer. So if I had like the Super 8 film look on here, in this case, it would work because of the way that I built the effect. But you can see
Interesting.
Right, if I lower the scale of the adjustment layer, it sort of like it changes the crop of it. So there is some like tricky things like occasionally where like if you want to transform a clip, you want to use, for example, the transform effect. The transform effect is under the distort video effects folder, not the transform, ironically. And if you add the transform effect, you might think, well, this is all the same stuff I have in the motion controls. But in this case, you can add the transform effect onto the adjustment layer, and it does influence every other clip underneath. So depending on your workflow, yeah, you can totally just apply effects onto adjustment layers if you want them over large cut sequences. Just sometimes you got to be careful. Like if you're seeing something weird happening and you don't know why, it's just maybe because of like some order of operations thing that the adjustment layer is, changing the opacity of the adjustment layer rather than the clip underneath. But
yeah, and that's interesting to think about that. Changing the scale of the adjustment layer may not affect the scale of the clip underneath. That like
right.
There are certain attributes that don't convert over because you are changing the adjustment layer, not the clip underneath.
Right. And but not to get too technical, but for the most part, adjustment layers are great. Definitely use them all the time. And like a lot of the time, like the way that I built a lot of these effects, where you drag one clip, like there's a and a B. So you drag one clip on part A and then one clip on part B, and that counts as the effect. The reason I did it that way is just for ease of use. If you're working on your own project, you might be able to do what I showed earlier with making the little adjustment layer strip. But what I did here, and I know we're sort of getting close, but just to wrap it up and maybe look forward to some things that we're going to learn in part 2, is if you remember when we did create that preset, let's say I had a Gaussian blur. Here, we'll see if I can wrap it up. This will only take 2 minutes. I'll speed run it. So if we add a Gaussian blur, so we're going to create a blur transition. To do this, we want to go towards the end of the clip, start at 0 blurriness, and then go up a lot at the very end of the clip.
Yep.
Now, if I right click and save this as a preset, here's where it's going to ask me, do you want to scale it? Do you want to anchor to in point, or do you want to anchor to out point? And that's where, like, if you scale it, it'll just proportionally, let's say like the last 25% of this clip was these keyframes. If I have a really short fast clip, it'll still make sure that only the last like 25% is the keyframes.
Yep. So this kind of locks it to the end of the clip, regardless of what clip it is. It will always stay at the out, right?
Actually, that's the anchor to out point. What
yes,
this does,
sorry, that's what I meant.
Right.
Yes.
What this does is it scales it. So if the clip is twice as long, then the keyframe, it'll just like multiply or divide everything. So it'll keep it in proportion. Whereas anchor to out point is what I use for a lot of these. No matter how long the clip is or whatever, the frames will always be like on the last 5 frames or whatever you want to say.
Sweet.
So right, and you can imagine that's how you can keep things consistent over many different clips. So the same
thing on the other side.
Right. Well,
you put over there.
The same effect that we made earlier with adjustment layers, you know, you can also make it in this way where you put an out and an in effect on one clip to the other.
And so we will be learning, sorry, we're going to get cut off in just a second. We're going to be learning more about that tomorrow. So tune back in same time tomorrow, and make sure you hang out with us for our Adobe Express Bootcamp that's coming up at 11:30 a.m. Pacific time tomorrow, right here on Adobe Live. Give Justin a follow, and we'll see you again tomorrow. Bye, everybody. Have a great day.